Honk, shoo, me, 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 me. Honk, shoo, me, 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 me. Honk, shoo, me, 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 me.
Sam.
Honk, shoo, me. Wait, what?
Sam.
Wait. Honor? Hey, what's up, man?
Did you sleep in here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You didn't go home after the last episode?
No.
Where'd you get the blanket and pillow? You have a pillow pet.
Dude, those are in my locker.
Whoa.
Yeah,
You got a locker in the studio?
This isn't the studio, dude. This is my home.
Oh.
I live here. You didn't know that?
Oh, well. You want to record a podcast episode?
I don't know, dude. Because right now I'm feeling like I'm on the edge of sleep. Oh, boy, we got the title of the intro. Let's go.
That's so loud. Welcome to Podpodcastcast.
Hello and welcome to Podpodcast, guys. It's a podcast where we review podcasts. I'm Sam.
I'm Honor.
Okay, Honor, we have this problem. We have this problem every time.
I think it's a fun...
You're trying to say it differently. You say it the same way every time, and you sound like you're depressed. You sound like I have you here at gunpoint, but I've had you here at gunpoint for what, like 6 months now, and you're not interested anymore. You don't care. You're like, I just wish it would be over.
I just always try to say it different enough that it sounds like I want it to never sound like, oh, you've stumbled onto the correct version. I want every single one to sound like, haven't got it yet.
You sound like you're always different forms of depressed, you know? It's colorful in that way. Well, Honor, I know that you may not sound very excited, but I know that you are, because today we're hitting an Honor special.
Yeah, you could call it that.
I love that your face, you kind of reeled in shock when I said that. You're like, huh, I guess, yeah, sure.
Yeah. It was more the special than the Honor that got me, because we did Wolf 359, which is for sure an Honor special.
That was an Honor special.
And we did the Magnus Archives. Well, we did not do the Magnus Archives. We did the Magnus Protocol. Yeah. Which was for sure an Honor special. So of all things, this one's less...
This feels like an Honor usual.
Yeah,
This feels like
maybe.
an Honor, like, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a 30-minute episode.
There's other people for whom it's probably way more of a special. I also don't feel like a particular expert, which maybe is not true, but...
Regardless of whether it's special, today we're talking about The Edge of Sleep, a audio drama produced by Q Code and starring Mark Fishbach, Markiplier, of whom you are a great fan. Also written by Jake Emanuel and Willie Block and directed by Jake Emanuel. This podcast, you recommended it to me.
Yes. Also, I believe it is done by both Q Code Productions and Wood Elf Productions, which are both studios that people might recognize. Wood Elf Productions
is Markiplier's.
Yes. I don't actually know if he's like ownership of it. I just know that's the one he's always working with.
Yeah, so the reason I say it's a Honor special is because it stars Mark Fishbach, famous YouTuber Markiplier, of whom, Honor, you are a big fan.
I am a fan, yes.
You're a big fan.
I was just meaning to agree with you.
Yeah.
I am very much a fan.
I'm glad. I agreed with me harder than you agreed with me, so take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so Edge of Sleep is a podcast that you recommended that we listen to. You have listened to it a while ago, right?
Yes. I believe it was 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago that it came out. I listened to it.
Yeah. I listened to it, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, mostly while on one drive. And this podcast is unhinged.
Isn't it awesome? That it's so crazy.
And withholding judgment for now. No, it's insane. The premise of the podcast. The premise of the podcast is that there's an apocalypse where everyone dies in their sleep at roughly 4 a.m. on July 4th.
Yeah.
Why is it July 4th? I have no idea.
Who knows?
But everyone falls asleep. Everyone that is asleep dies.
Yeah.
And since then, the rest of the podcast is this post-apocalyptic situation of like, what do you do when everyone dies?
Yeah, because there's a very small handful of people who had not gone to sleep yet and then realize, oh, everyone's dead. We should not go to sleep.
Yeah, okay. So let's I want to go through the plot kind of fast.
Yeah.
Faster than we normally do because I have many, many thoughts.
Yeah.
So the basic plot of the podcast is that we follow main character Dave, who's voiced by Mark Fishbach, who is a night security guard at someplace. And the show opens with him having a dream that there's like a giant whale, and the whale, is warning him about an elephant. He wakes up from the dream. His coworker Mateo's like, dude, you're crazy, man. You have crazy dreams. You're talking in your sleep. And Dave is like, yeah, man, that happens to me. I'm a weird sleep guy. And they're like, whoa, look on the security camera. There's some weird van in our parking lot. We got to go run him off. They go out there, and it's this really weird, creepy, like serial killer-y guy. And they're like, is there someone in the back of your van? He's like, no, there's not. And he drives away.
Yeah.
Okay, then we just drop that. We go. Well, also, just a quick aside. He has a bumper stickers on the back of his van, the serial killer guy does, that are the Democrat donkey and the Republican elephant. And Dave is like, elephant like in my dream.
Elephant.
Great connections, Dave. You're
Good
rocking
job.
it, buddy. Dave is like, dude, Mateo, that was really freaky. Mateo's like, I know. And Dave's like, I'm really sad about my ex-girlfriend. And Mateo's like, yeah, I get it. He's like, I'm going to go see if she's at this party because that was so weird and I'm freaked out. And Mateo's like, whatever, fine. And so Dave goes to this party. It's like, it's early in the morning, like night, morning,
Yeah.
He goes to this party. He meets this drug dealer, Gus, that he doesn't like. He's like, hey, Gus. And Gus is like, hey. And then Dave is like, hey, is this a dead body over here? And Gus is like, I got to go.
Yeah.
Dave is
Yeah,
like,
because they think he OD'd at first.
yeah. So Dave is like, whoa, this guy must have overdosed. I'm going to take him in my car and go to the hospital. So he takes him to the hospital. He goes to the hospital, and then he finds nurses and doctors crying with there's other dead people on the sidewalk.
Yeah, they're like smoking cigarettes.
Yeah. And Dave is like, what happened? Cut to earlier, we focused in on a different character, Linda. Linda is an overnight nurse. Linda, we get to know her things. She chats with her other nurse ladies. And at like 4 a.m., she's checking up on somebody, and everybody in the hospital that is asleep dies. And they're like, what the heck's happening? We got to call the CDC. We got to call the FBI. We got to call NASA. They're like, we got to get everybody in here. Okay, then we come back to the present. Dave and Linda are like, Linda's like, Dave, there's something crazy going on. We don't know what's going on. Can I get a ride? And Dave's like, yeah, okay, sure, I guess. They go around town, and they go to people's houses, and they're like, everyone's dead.
Yep.
And then Linda's like, well, I can't call anymore. I can't get a hold of the FBI. I can't get a hold of NASA. Like, no one picks up the phone.
Nope.
Then Linda's like, we need to go to L.A. because they're in Santa Mira. We're going to go to L.A. Dave is like, okay. And then she's like, all right, man, I'm really tired. I'm going to take some sleeping pills. And Dave is like, okay. And then he's like, she called them elf tranquilizers, but the dream told me beware of the elephant. Did I say elf tranquilizer?
Yep, you sure did.
Whatever. Leave it in. That's funnier. Elf
Yep.
tranquilizer is funnier. And then Dave is like, no, Linda, you can't take the elephant tranquilizer. You got to wake up. And she's like, what? He's like, vomit. And she does.
Yep.
And then she's like, what's going on? He's like, it's caused by sleep. If you go to sleep, you'll die. She was like, that's crazy. She calls up the hospital of Santa Mira. And then she's like, hey, check in on my coworker who said they were going to take a nap. And the doctor does. And he's like, oh, my God, she's dead. And so, okay. Finally, the characters realize that it's caused by sleep, whatever. They're like, we got to go back to Santa Mira to the hospital to acquire awake drugs.
Yep. Yeah, crazy drugs.
They get back to the hospital. Dave is like, calls up his buddy Mateo, who is his night worker guy. And he's like, hey, Mateo. And Mateo's like, yeah, what's up? I'm gaming, bro. And it's like, don't go to sleep. Come here, take drugs. And Mateo's like, okay.
Yep.
He also calls Katie, his ex-girlfriend, but she doesn't pick up. He's like, oh, crud.
Yeah, crud.
Then Dave, Mateo, and Linda, hospital empty now.
Mm-hmm.
Totally empty. She's like, I guess everyone went home.
Or died.
Yeah, maybe. Then she's like, we need to perform autopsies to figure out, because they're like, this is a virus. Everyone's dying because of this virus. We got to figure out the autopsies. And so Linda, who, this is where I'll mention this now, is hyper competent.
Yes.
She is a nurse and she's doing some like insane medical things.
Yeah. She also from the get-go has been the one being like, here's an idea for a solution, or at least like, here's what I can come up with for a logical explanation of what's going on. Like at first when they're back in the hospital and everyone starts flatlining all at once, she's like, there's a gas leak in the hospital. Yeah. Everyone needs to get out. And her boss is like, no, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, nope, everyone leave.
Yeah, Linda seems to know maybe not everything, but when Linda says something, it's almost entirely true. It's almost just like the writers being like, and this is the case. She's hyper competent. She's a nurse, like an ER nurse or whatever, but she's doing these autopsies, which is like I've never done before. They do these autopsies, and they cut up people's skulls. They look at their brains. 1, head filled with smoke.
Yep.
2, burned on everyone's brain is this black triangle. Spooky doodles. Okay.
Spooky.
This time, Dave gets a call from Katie. She's like, Dave, I've been high on speed. I'm just coming down. I've been awake for a long time. Dave's like, I'm glad you were high on speed because I'm glad you're alive. And she's like, great. He's like, come to the hospital. We'll give you other drugs to keep you awake. She's like, what's happening? He's like, just come to the hospital. And then she gets picked up and put in the van by the serial killer guy we met earlier.
Yep.
Cut to next episode. Serial killer guy comes to the hospital with a gun and starts shooting.
Yeah, this is the craziest episode.
It's unhinged.
Yeah, like there's other things that are more like cosmic and weird or whatever. This is the craziest episode.
It's so insane. So, serial killer guy comes with a gun to the hospital, hits Dave. Dave loses Mateo and Linda. He doesn't know where they go. Dave passes out, wakes up on like a medical gurney, and serial killer guy's like, hello, little man. I'm going to kill you. And Dave is like trying to placate him, trying to
stall for time, essentially.
Stall for time. The serial killer guy is like, you know what, Dave? I think you're a cool guy. Honor, how do I even approach this?
He tries to castrate Dave.
Serial killer guy is so... This is the most uncomfortable...
He's insane.
This is the most uncomfortable... It's the most uncomfortable I've ever been in my car. I mean, I was flying down the highway, and I was like, gee, I wish I was a way to get away from this. But it was in surround sound. Yep. The serial killer guy's like, Dave, you and me are going to be best friends. I've got your ex-girlfriend in my van, and we're all going to go down to Mexico.
Yeah, he's a real bad guy.
It is just like they're like, what if we made the most evil man?
Yes.
Okay, whatever. Mateo and Linda rescue Katie from the bad guy's van, and they find that he had like another girl in there, but she is asleep, so now she's dead. They go back. They save Dave from the bad guy. They lock the bad guy in the closet. Then they're like, what are we going to do? They're like, this is crazy. We can't believe this happened. And Linda's like, well, we need more information on this disease. So we need to have someone go asleep. And when they die, we need to have them in an MRI machine to see it happen. And so they put the evil guy in an MRI machine. Wait till he falls asleep.
Yep. And watch his little brain light up as he dies.
Watch his brainwaves, which Linda can do.
Yep.
And she's like, and when he dies, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. He died in a dream.
Whoa. You die in the dream and you die in real life.
Oh, God. yeah, it's so cool.
You die in the dream, you die in real life.
Then the crew's feeling pretty hopeless. They're like, we don't know what we're going to do. We're all very, very tired. All these drugs can only last us so long. We can't stay awake. Then Dave's like, I know what must happen. I need to go to sleep. And they're like, no. But he's like, no, I'll go to sleep for 2 minutes. Because it took that other guy like 3 minutes.
Yeah, they were able to watch the clock to see how long it took.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to sleep for 2 minutes. Then you wake me up. And I'm going to see what's on the other side. And they're like, this is insane. But Dave, his entire life, we find out, has had this history of like crazy, vivid, and often horrific dreams.
Yeah.
He also, had this premonition in the dream of the whale and the elephant. So he's like, okay, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, it's also wrapped up in it's the reason that him and Katie are no longer together.
Yes, because he like broke her arm or something.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what happened to them, but I know it was because Katie was scared because he starts doing things in his sleep. He's hurt himself a lot. He's hurt other people when he's been asleep because it's these really horrific and like violent nightmares.
Right. And I want to come back to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so he goes to sleep. He enters the dream realm.
Yes.
In the dream realm, Dave is in the desert, and he walks for a very long time in the desert, becoming incredibly thirsty. I think at some point he says he's a creature of just thirst.
Yes, he does.
And at some point, he is approached by his mother and father in the dream realm, and they offer him a glass of water. In the glass of water is an ocean of people crying out for help and in immense agony. He looks at his parents, and they have black triangle eyes, and they're like drinking from the water. And Dave knew that if he drank from the water, he would die. But he's like, I gotta do it. But then he's saved by the whale.
The whale.
The whale comes back, floods ocean land, and is like, Dave, you gotta meet me here. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, you gotta meet me here on this island. And he's like, what are you talking about? And then his mom and dad transform into like black goop creature insect men.
Yep.
And then the elephant's like, meet me here and bring cigarettes.
Yeah.
Dave wakes up and says, we got to go to Papua New Guinea.
Yep.
Okay.
This podcast is so awesome.
The rest of the crew is like, you're crazy. This is insane. What is even happening? Dave is like, there's supernatural entities. The world is different than we know it. Mm-hmm. And then people arrive in the hospital parking lot, but they have their eyes closed like they're asleep. Mm. And they realize these are sleep people, but they are being controlled by the sleep realm monster, the dream realm monsters.
Yeah, the little black triangles on their forehead.
Yeah, do they have little black triangles?
No, on their brains.
In the brains, yeah.
Everyone got it in their brain.
The people that arrive try to stop the crew, try to kill them. The crew gets in a car and they're like, "We gotta drive to the airport." Then they have to like fend off some guy who's like trying to break through their windshield. They drive to the airport. They're like loading up. They're like, "Wow, there's a plane here. We're gonna be good. It's got enough fuel." Oh, Mateo's also a pilot.
Yeah,
this is gonna be fine. We're gonna make it. We can do this flight. We're all incredibly it's been like 3 days. They haven't slept.
Yeah, they've been hallucinating for a while. I'm pretty sure.
And they're like, "All right, let's go." And then Katie's like, I'm too weak. Leave me." And Dave's like, "I'll never leave you." And she's like, "Okay." And then she locks herself in the car and is like, "Sorry, I gotta go to sleep. Mm-hmm. And if I sleep, I'll become one of them, and I'll try to kill you, and I can't have that happen."
Yeah.
And then
that is the reasoning, because she's like, "I'll turn into one of these things while I'm on the plane, and then you won't be able to get away."
Right. And she falls asleep, and she does become one. Like, she does wake up, and she's like, "Dave, I'm gonna kill you, Dave."
Yeah.
And anyway, so Linda, Dave, Mateo get on the flight. This is like the last episode. It's got my favorite intro of all the episodes.
It's my favorite.
Welcome to the flight to hell.
Yes.
Strap in.
Yeah, I love any sequence where it's Dave's. Sometimes it's nightmares. Mostly it's the hallucinations he has, because it's such a weird, specific, like funny tone that is very unique.
Yes. It is. I have to say that I rather enjoy. Like it was darkly comedic.
Yes,
but still comedic.
Absolutely.
Which is which is like something this podcast does do from time to time. You know, it's fairly serious, but there's also, you know, sometimes the like protagonists make a joke and you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense, like someone would do this.
Absolutely, the dark comedy, I think without this podcast would fall apart because it's also at its core absurd.
Absolutely. Okay, we go on the flight to hell. The flight to hell is supposed to be kind of climactic, but it is mostly an audio montage of time passing. Yeah. Because all they have to do is stay awake, but they're hallucinating. Anyway, they crash off the coast of Papua New Guinea. Linda, Dave get out. Mateo dies.
Yeah, Mateo fell asleep.
I don't think he didn't fall asleep. He stayed awake, but he crashed. He just like didn't escape. He didn't get to the top of the
Gotcha. I always thought it was once he crashed, it was like his brain couldn't keeping him awake.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Because Mateo was the one struggling the most with staying awake because he had to fly a plane while being very sleep deprived.
I don't even know if it seems like Dave is the one that's struggling the most.
He's the one
Mateo does a great job of just burning himself with cigarettes.
That's what I was going to say, is Mateo's burning himself with cigarettes a lot.
I mean, that sounds awesome. No, that's not cool. Dave, Linda survive. They get to the shore. There is a young boy and an old man, and the old man is like, I am the whale, Dave. And Dave's like, oh, you're the whale. And he's like, did you bring cigarettes? And he's like, no. And he's like, damn it.
Yeah.
He's like, we must go to my village, the ancient sleepwalkers. And then they get in this car and they're going to this village, and Dave falls asleep. And Dave, while he's asleep, it sounds like he in dream realm enters like solitary confinement. He knows nothing but isolation, and it's just so painful. Like he forgets who he is. Sounds like he spends like 1,000,000 years there, kind of thing. And then the sleep creatures are like, "Where Dave, accept your fate, Dave. Be dead, Dave." And he's like, "No." And then he's saved by the people of the village, who are the sleepwalker defender guardian people, and they save him from the monsters. And he wakes up, and he's like, the old man is like, "Dave, you are safe now. You and Linda can stay here, and I will explain everything that has happened when you awake." And Dave is like, "Okay." He's like, "I can sleep," and the old man's like, "Yes." And Dave goes to sleep, and that's the end of the podcast.
Hey, there's a season 2.
Hey, Honor?
Yeah.
No, there isn't.
Not out yet.
Yeah. Okay. Just because there could be a sequel to a thing doesn't mean that
there is a season 2 in the works. Is what I'm saying.
It's written.
Yes.
That's what they've confirmed, but they haven't recorded yet. So the story is incomplete. And I'm gonna come out and say it. That is deeply frustrating.
For you.
No. No.
Sam is making the most clawed-grabbing hands at me.
I just can't. It's like, all right. Let's talk about our opinions.
Yeah. You go first.
Immediately, I'm immensely irritated by this ending.
Yeah.
In that there is not one. The podcast doesn't end. The story of the podcast doesn't end. There's a lot of hints to this. So, we get to understand that this apocalypse is supernatural in origin, right? These sleep creatures have come out of some mythological, place that they were sealed in and have come to wreak havoc on the world. And we get to understand some of this mythology. There's an episode with the old man, and you learn more about him. But you don't understand why any of this has happened. You don't really understand the whole mystery. It has not unfurled. You get a culprit, but you don't understand why it's happened. It's not satisfying, and it just doesn't end. The heroes don't win or don't lose. They just don't do anything, and
they get to the next spot.
That's not an ending.
To a season 1.
To a season 1 that happened 6 years ago.
Well, okay, because Edge of Sleep, the other thing about Edge of Sleep is that if we want to talk about recent events, there is a TV adaptation
Right.
of The Edge of Sleep season 1
Right.
that only just came out.
Right.
This was in production a long time ago. It was delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So that was when, because they were talking about a season 2 way, like, years ago.
They've been talking about a season 2 forever.
Yeah, because it's been things that have been wrapped up in the pandemic where they were going to get started on it and then things got shut way down.
Yeah.
And so then huge roadblocks. That's part of why I'm like, even if it has been, I don't even want to think about how many years, still, it hasn't been a decade or anything. And they just got finished with the TV adaptation, which means the next thing is probably going to be production on season 2. Because that is, I'm pretty sure, how they've always been talking about doing it, is that the film adaptation of season 1 would come out, and then people would be recording for season 2.
Yeah. So the first episode of Edge of Sleep came out in September 19th, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's even supposed to take place in 2019.
Yep.
So yes, pandemic delays make sense. Regardless, the story is incomplete.
Yeah.
Which is, for me, frustrating. You know, it's an apocalypse podcast with like a mystery at the heart of it,
mm-hmm.
and the mystery is not resolved. And there was a pandemic between now and then,
mm-hmm.
but it's still been 5 years, right? They've
Sure.
had the script for season 2 ready since 2022, as per the Wikipedia page.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I hope that someday they come out with it, but just know going into this podcast does not end.
Yes.
And for me, that's like the biggest thing. Dude, have I told you about my theory about like modern storytelling?
No.
This is we're gonna go into Sam conspiracy land.
Uh-huh.
Not that there's really a conspiracy, but rather I feel like in a lot of modern stories, like TV shows, podcasts, you know, people are afraid to write an ending. People are afraid to just land
mm-hmm.
the plane, just land it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because people want to make something that's successful, and then have it go on for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. I as an audience member, I want you to give me an ending.
Yeah.
That's important to me, because otherwise, you see this happens. Honor, you see how
mm-hmm.
red my face is.
Yeah.
You see the rage,
uh-huh.
the smoke that's billowing out of my nose.
Yeah.
Like a dragoon.
Yeah, for sure.
You gotta give me an ending. Otherwise, what's the point of a story?
What I'm saying is that correct me if I'm wrong, internet and listeners, I'm pretty sure the plan has been for there to be a season 2 since the beginning.
Yeah.
Then means I'm not frustrated, because I know this isn't the end of the story, but I do feel like I can definitely get when a season ends and it feels like there's been nothing offered as a sort of kind of landing for, okay, and then we'll take off into the next season. But I feel like it, you know, even just as simple as the fact that they go to sleep and don't die. And they're like, okay, we've got over that big obstacle of just not going to sleep for, I don't even remember how many days.
It's like 3-4 days.
3 or 4?
Yeah.
There is an amount of, okay, we're tapping into people who actually know what's going on. We're starting to kind of know what's going on. We don't feel completely in the dark. Then season 2 will do more things. I feel fine with that.
I don't feel fine with that
You
at all.
have a strong opinion, and that's okay and allowed. But also, for listeners, I think it's a fine and fun listen.
I think
just as a season 1.
I think a podcast, especially audio drama that does not end, should come with a warning label.
I think that's extreme.
Sure, it is. Obviously, it's extreme, but it's true. I listened to, so there's 8 episodes. They're all about 25 minutes long.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, it's not super long.
It's not super long, but it's still like a considerable amount of time that I dedicated to it, and I feel like I, as a audience member, I got no fulfillment. You didn't give me a complete story. You gave me chapter 1. And I don't want to read chapter 1 until there's an ending.
I feel like chapter 1 feels unfair. To say book 1 of a series or something, that feels more accurate.
If this was book 1, I would stage a mass burning. I would be so upset. That's
crazy.
Yeah. Well, this is also
That's crazy.
Dude, when I was in the 6th grade, I read my first 400-page book. It was a Herculean effort. I spent days in my little closet with a blanket wrapped around me reading this dang book. And you know what? 20 pages from the end, I'm like, okay, so there's like a Europe-wide conspiracy during World War II, and our hero hasn't unfolded it yet, but surely it'll happen in the next 20 pages, and it didn't. And it was like part 1 of like 3 books, and I lost my mind.
That is how it goes, buddy.
That sucks.
That is awesome, because then there's more books to read.
But okay, here's the thing. Okay, and then perhaps maybe I would feel differently, right? If I was like, yes, this podcast, I really loved the journey. Honor, I did not love the journey of this podcast.
I did, and I think that's maybe the difference. Yeah.
It's worth noting that this is a extremely well produced podcast.
Yes.
I mean, some of the best audio, like sound effects and engineering work.
Yeah.
In any podcast period, hands down.
Yeah.
It's amazing what they do. They do such a beautiful job. Even in like the first episode.
Yeah.
Dave and Mateo are at their like office spot, in front of all the TV monitors doing their guard work. And you hear, if you're listening in headphones, you've got surround sound, you hear Dave come talk to Mateo, and you hear him roll his chair from the left side of your head to the right side of your head.
Yeah.
And, and on that, like, if that was the only thing, that's like maybe a little gimmick, but it's that all the time.
Yeah. Yep.
Really immersive sound.
Yeah. Which this is definitely a staple of what Q Code does. They do sound production and that really immersive experience and creating a whole environment around you with sound so well. It's a huge part of what they were going for in Birds of Empire, and they definitely do it well in Edge of Sleep.
Yeah. Well is maybe even an understatement. Really,
yes.
The top of the industry. I mean, I have not heard anything better, and they do that consistently. Everything has a sound effect, like a lot of times in a podcast that we liked, Midnight Burger.
Yes.
Midnight Burger has sound effects, right? It's an audio drama. You hear people put their like shoes on the table, go clip clop, for people walking across the room. But that's not that's not constant, right? The sound effects aren't constant. Frequently, it's just characters talking, because that's kind of the audio drama way. And in Midnight Burger, which had a story that I really loved, a lot of times the sound effects fell short, especially noticeably like large crowds. You're like, okay, you're using the same soundbite over and over. Never happened in this podcast. They had an ensemble cast, a very good one. Everyone was an excellent actor.
Yeah.
I have to say, Mateo, hats off.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Mateo's probably my favorite character.
He's so good. The voice actor, fantastic. Linda, also really great. Everyone just did so well. I told you sometimes about Wolf 359. This is just going to be the reference podcast. You know? Listener, if you haven't listened to those episodes, go back now.
Yeah.
Wolf 359, there were some times where I was like, I feel like the voice acting was flat, right? Where I'm like, I don't think they did as great a job. Never even occurred to me in this podcast.
Yeah.
Everyone did excellently. Almost sometimes the sound effects are almost too good.
Yeah.
Because this podcast gets gory.
Yes.
I physically turned the volume down in my car when I did
the same thing when I listened to it the first time.
Yeah. Well, when they do the autopsies,
Yeah.
And you hear the sound of them taking a bone saw and cracking bone.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's 100% realistic, right? But it's gross. They do a great job, but boy, I did not like it.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those ones. I believe they have warnings for that kind of stuff in the description. Worth checking those.
Yes, if you're not okay with gore and like well done gory sound effects, don't even look at this.
Yeah,
podcast.
I will say it's not as bad as, like I said on the last podcast I reviewed, they put throwing up sounds in. I don't think it was as bad as stuff like that because it is semi-realistic, but it's like, wow, that's too good.
Yeah, it's
to be comfortable to listen to.
Yeah, it's really good. And also in some of Dave's dream sequences from when he's a child. So we have a lot of scenes with little Dave, and he has these horrifying dreams. And like one of them, he dreams that there's these little monsters inside him.
Yeah.
And he ends up stabbing himself. And it sucks, dude.
Yeah.
I was like this. Not that they did a bad job with it, but I did not enjoy listening to that because I'm just like, they're like, just the sounds of them like tearing open his body and the sounds of him stabbing himself is just like, I don't know.
And even just it's worth warning people. This isn't necessarily a podcast that I recommend to people willy-nilly.
Sure.
Because it is fairly dark. It's hard to say that it's like dark because in a lot of ways it's very absurd. There's humor. But it definitely doesn't really pull punches about any part that is uncomfortable, like the serial killer guy and they talk about a streak of teenage girls that he kidnapped and did bad things to.
Right. And so let's talk about that, right? Because it's worth noting that this podcast is on the whole dramatic. Yeah. With a tinge of comedy, right? Definitely not enough for one to label this like a dark comedy. It's a dramatic podcast. But Mark Fischbach. Mark Fischbach is a very funny guy. That's how he kind of rose to prominence, and he has some good moments here. But this podcast can get really dark, right? So the things we're thinking of are the autopsies, okay, kind of whatever, but mostly the serial killer and the Dave describing his like childhood dreams. Yeah. Both of those to me were deeply uncomfortable and unnecessary. This whole show does not change if the serial killer is removed.
I think
you laugh because you agree. That's true.
Yeah. Yes. That is one point I agree on, and is probably my biggest thing that I'm like critique for this podcast is that I understand why they had the serial killer. I do think they needed that for, I don't know, there's probably some other way to get around it, but it was someone who, there was a little bit of a quandary that they had about it, but for the most part, like Linda for sure was like, I feel no remorse about utilizing this guy's death to find out more information about what's going on, which is also a dark thing. Yeah.
And then wait for him to sleep so he dies.
Yeah, which is also a dark thing.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of death in this, which is inherently dark. But because they needed to figure out somehow what was going on. So if it wasn't a person that, maybe it would be interesting but extremely hard to pull off realistically if one of them was like, I'll go in the MRI machine. But they had this person who they could do these kind of horrible, kind of horrid experiment on. But definitely it's like they go into so much detail that you do pretty much come to agree with Linda that like, yeah, this guy is horrible and he's not going to be good to any of the people who are still living.
Right.
But a lot of the details about what he did in his deal were very uncomfortable and not necessarily necessary. Dave's nightmares, I think I feel differently on because that was so much of his character. I think it is dark and difficult to listen to. I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. So we agree. Serial killer. I just think he doesn't need to be there at all. He doesn't really add anything. They have this kind of moment where it feels like the writer's like, oh, and there was supposed to be a purpose to this, wasn't there? Right? It almost felt like they were, they wrote this and then they went a different way almost.
If that's an interesting way to see it, because the way I saw it was that they needed someone to fill this plot hole for them of, okay, how do they figure this out so that Dave can be like, I'll go to sleep for 2 minutes and we know that you could wake me up then because I won't be dead yet. Then they created this horrible guy.
Yeah, but to create this whole plot thread, right, that starts from episode 1.
Yeah. I mean, that's a way of justifying it.
Yeah, it just doesn't, they could have done it in 1,000 other ways.
Yeah.
The dream sequences, I didn't care for because I'm not a big horror guy. Like, I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely fair.
And I also don't. I mean, I guess in some respect it establishes Dave's connection with this like otherworldly thing almost. Mm-hmm. But it didn't make me appreciate Dave more. It didn't make me feel like it added a lot of logic to what was going on because it's already everything's already supernatural. So I don't necessarily need Dave to be like the chosen one to fight. I just don't. In some respects it helped. I don't know. I didn't really care for it. It didn't. I feel like it didn't move things that much. Maybe if they explained why it happened.
I think that could potentially happen, but I don't know. I think for me, which we've talked about our differences and that one of us likes horror and one of us doesn't.
It's true.
Which I think probably contributes here in that for me it adds intrigue to Dave's character because when someone has to handle the kinds of things that he's had to handle, that changes how a character operates. And I think if anything, it adds the most interesting layer to, like, we see how it harms his relationship with Katie because she is scared of him,
but which that feels so abstract because those characters, because they're in this extreme situation, never like act on that. You know what I mean? It doesn't.
No,
it doesn't feel like I understand that they could like plant those threads, but it doesn't feel like any of those things go anywhere. To me, it seems like the biggest connection to the overall plot is that he does have some experience with this super dreams or whatever,
Yeah, I don't know. I think there is something interesting about the fact that he's used to dreams having danger in this way, or sleep being a dangerous thing. I do think sets him up to be a good protagonist for, the scenario that's going on. And I think, especially because there is going to be a season 2, and there's this idea of these people who died in their sleep that are getting up again to try and hurt and kill everyone else, when Dave has been a person who his whole life he can't explain why, but he has these horrible dreams and he sleepwalks and he hurts people. When he does that, there's connections to be drawn there, and I think there's interesting things to do and think about, and it makes intrigue for me. I can definitely get why it doesn't inherently do that, especially at this current point in the story where they haven't inherently tied those things together. But for me, it is an area of intrigue, and I find it interesting, and I think other people could too.
Yeah, I get that. And you touched on there the apocalypse. So let's talk about this, because ultimately this story is a apocalypse story, right? That's the whole, especially as it's pitched, right? You don't know about all this supernatural kind of stuff at the start, and it feels like, this is, I was kind of talking it through with someone, and this is kind of what I settled on. To me, I feel like Edge of Sleep has a lot of parallels with the hit movie franchise A Quiet Place. You know about this? You watch these movies?
I have seen the first one. I don't remember if I've seen more.
But you get the plot.
Yeah.
Aliens come down. They hear good.
Yeah.
And if you make a sound, you die, right?
Yep.
So it feels like in both of these stories, in these apocalypse stories, the authors were like, what if there was, an apocalypse where one of the most basic human things was taken away, right? What if you can't make any noise, And it spins out into this, that's kind of an interesting idea. How do people adapt from that? What do they do? And similarly with Edge of Sleep, it's like, what if you just can't sleep, right?
Yeah.
Sleep is almost this kind of mysterious thing, Science is like, what is it?
Yeah. Yep.
So what does that look like? Now, in A Quiet Place, if you can't make a lot of noise, in that movie, you get to see this family that's living in this way where they're just being quiet about everything. They've got this house with like trails that are, paved with like wood chips or whatever to make it quiet, and sometimes they can make noise when they're next to this very loud waterfall. So you see how people adapt. Interesting, right? Edge of Sleep. The apocalypse is that you die if you sleep. How do people adapt? They sleep. There's nothing. This doesn't spin off into a wider world.
Yeah.
The conclusion is very quickly that people will die.
Yeah.
It doesn't provoke any more thoughts than that. It's just like, well, I guess people will just struggle until they are completely eliminated because humans can't go without sleep.
I mean, I think it's a very different kind of thing, because it is, like you said, sleep is a very mysterious kind of thing to science where we're like, we don't exactly know why we can't substitute something else for sleeping. So I can definitely see where the idea came from for the authors of being like, what if it was even weirder? But also, I just think they're going for different things because A Quiet Place is this, it's more in the post-apocalyptic, right, where it's this world they've kind of settled into. There's still very much the danger, but they have this cycle of life that they're settled into. Yeah. Edge of Sleep is immediately after this has taken place, and it is a far more extreme thing where you can kind of imagine, like, the whole time there's this looming threat of everyone might die.
Yeah.
Because it seems so likely.
Right. I agree it's very different, but I think one is these concepts that's clearly spun off in the author's mind. If you take away like people's ability to talk and speak and how we communicate, I think that's a way more rich concept and world than what if you can no sleep. Because one of those you can talk about how people adapt.
Yeah.
And how people overcome and what that looks like and if they can. And one of those you just have to be like, well, but they will. And then everyone will die, right? And so, if that was the whole story, right, for Edge of Sleep, it would be a terrible podcast, right? But they add in something else. They're like, okay, let's get even weirder with this.
Yeah.
I just think that the idea itself does not lend well to like an interesting story with great human themes. Does that make sense? It doesn't. Where does it go?
I mean, I think it's a much more short form because, again, this whole first season of this podcast happens over the course of like 4 days because that's how long they can stay awake.
Right.
So it's gonna be a lot shorter and just more high intensity than like A Quiet Place, where it's a more mundane cycle of life and days and weeks of this family. But I do still think, like in Edge of Sleep, it's a lot more limited, but there's this kind of more scrappy, desperate fight to be like, okay, what are the things we can do to keep ourselves awake? Like when Mateo is flying that airplane and he's like, I have to stay awake, and not only awake but alert because he's flying an airplane.
Right.
And like, he burns cigarettes on his leg.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, this setting in general kind of falls flat for me, and even what is there, I don't think the authors explore it well. Immediately. Dave, Mateo, Linda are like the only people on Earth.
Yeah.
Immediately. Which is crazy because it's 4th of July and you're telling me like no one else is awake.
Yeah.
No one else figures it out. No one else thinks anything. They can't pick up the FBI. You tell me there's not one guy working in a call center somewhere? No one on earth. What about all the people that are awake in India? What about those people? You know what? And I get that this podcast.
That is for sure a whole, yeah. Because I think they very briefly are like, well, maybe not everyone's fallen asleep yet. And then eventually they're like, it's been longer than 24 hours. It's just us. So definitely agree on that one.
And whatever, the authors don't have to explore any of that stuff. It's a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I felt like they came up with a setting that was like, for me, I was like, okay, all right. And then didn't explore any aspects of this concept, of this dystopia, of this apocalypse that were interesting to me. You know, I feel like they missed out on some of those parts.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. Yeah. I think there are interesting aspects to it. I like I don't know what word to use for it, but it feels like a much more potent and condensed version of how in The Quiet Place it's this familial, like I've been saying, cycle of everyday life that they're going through, where they're leaning on each other to get through these things.
Yeah.
They have these systems. And at The Edge of Sleep, it's a lot more, because it's also darker and there's more horror and there's more of this dread of, seems a lot more likely that everyone is going to die. And so it's this more fast pace of like, yeah, they're taking crazy drugs, they're hallucinating, they're like slapping each other to stay awake,
Right.
They're burning cigarettes out on themselves. And so it's this more kind of intense and frenzied, like, of the handful of them trying to keep each other awake, which does then, like, when Katie was like, I can't stay awake anymore, but they formed this really tight bond really fast because they're, yeah, so I think it just sets up for more potent examples, but they are a lot fewer, and yeah, they're not going to last for an interesting sort of, let's build out a whole world where people could survive in this kind of thing, because they're not going to survive infinitely on that. So yeah, I think you're very right in that it misses out on a lot of that type of intrigue, and they could have expanded on it more. I think it would have been more interesting if they had been able to get in contact with other pockets of people around the world who hadn't gone to sleep yet, having more examples of, like, how could those people try to keep in touch, try to figure things out, whatever. But it went the way it went, and I still think there are interesting aspects to that.
I agree. And I think, to me, the genre of apocalypse is most interesting in talking about human adaptability, right? You know, I mean, that's
fair.
The idea of Mad Max, the idea of The Walking Dead, right?
Yeah.
Is how do people cope? Obviously, the authors were not unaware that that's not the story they're telling.
Yeah.
I think it's just a little shallower of a setting for them to take. But I think you're also right that that doesn't mean that there's not an interesting story there.
I think the main thing, because I think that's not necessarily my critique of The Edge of Sleep, but I do feel like there's a related thing where I like The Edge of Sleep. I think there's interesting things going on. I think it could have been more interesting because there's certain things I feel like they could have gotten more into, like if there were other people who were still awake in different pockets of the world. Right. But especially, I feel like they're so close in some areas because I don't think it's as much apocalypse as it is just sort of this cosmic horror, because it's a lot less about the survivability in a long form, like human adaptability kind of way, as it is about this looming dread of a force that you can't stop. Because there's the supernatural thing where they're like, we don't understand what's going on and we don't know how to stop these things, but even more so because at the core of the concept, it's how do you not go to sleep, which we as humans don't really understand and people have tried to take control of to not have the need for sleep anymore, but you will just fall asleep
right
eventually.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they're aware of that. They're definitely doing horror-ish things, but I feel like there are ways they could have leaned into that more that I think would have put the punch on it that would kind of make the other things feel more relevant because you'd know more concretely what they were doing.
Yeah. And I think so this is part of where my broader feeling about the setting comes in is like I said, I think all the actors did on the whole, very good job.
Yeah.
Right? I love Dave and Mateo, the way they play off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Genuinely quite good.
Really funny, yeah.
You know, Linda, even though she's perhaps unrealistically hyper competent, is a good character. Being like
you're rooting for her for sure.
Absolutely, because you're like, Dave's got nothing going on in his nog. Absolutely not. We got to, and Linda's like, okay, we'll do this, and especially when you're getting the story told from the perspective of Dave, it makes sense for someone else to be an authority figure and being like, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I also feel like because of the setting and the way the characters interacted with it, it almost made me. I feel like I didn't care about the characters as much. You know what I mean? Like when Katie dies, I like really don't care.
Really?
I mean, it really feels like a pre-climax, setup. Like, does this make sense?
Yeah.
It felt unnatural. They were like, all right, we're going to get you out of the plane. And she's like, actually, I'm going to die now. It's just like, and also, it wasn't that there was a, like a giant boulder coming her way or some villain that was like snatched her up and killed her. She just went to sleep. And perhaps the like anticlimax of that is the reason I care less. I get that that's what they want to explore, is that something so mundane as being sleep can be horrifying.
Yeah.
But I don't really care. Obviously, Katie was like the least developed character.
Yeah.
Of the four of them.
I don't know. I think I will go to bat for her death, though. I thought it was one of my favorite scenes. I think because of the idea of her being like, I know we're about to get on this plane where there's nowhere else to go if something goes bad, and she knows that she's the one falling behind and who is struggling the most to stay awake, and now knows that if she goes to sleep, she will start trying to kill them. So I think that sort of self-sacrifice because of caring about them and wanting to assure their safety, and then the way Dave feels about that because he's trying to like protect everyone and everything. I think it's a good, impactful scene.
Yeah, I to me it just felt like I was so aware of the writer in the room, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like Katie made that choice. I felt like that choice was written for her. Does that make sense? Because they get to this point where they're like, we're at the airport, and Dave's like, Katie, you got to stay awake. And she's like, I'm so sleepy because I was on speed,
Yeah.
And just like she's crashing from all that speed. And, it's not like Katie was established earlier to be this beautiful, self-sacrificial person. She was just like, I'm so sleepy. And Dave's like, you got to stay awake. And they're about to the plane. And she's like, Dave, if I fall asleep, will I become one of those things? And he's like, you're not going to fall asleep. And she's like, okay. And then, like, suddenly she's just locked in the car. She's like, I'm doing this for you. Honk shoe, honk shoe. It felt kind of rapid and a little unmotivated in a way that didn't, that scene particularly didn't grab me, right? So, but I felt wider because of the setting. I don't know. It did the way the characters interacted with this setting that I'm like, I'm not all the way there with you.
Like I said, I think there's a lot that Edge of Sleep does really well, but it does feel like, and in some ways, in ways that I can't quite articulate, but It feels like there's a last punch it's missing to be really good and really grabbing.
Oh, okay. Can I tell you? Can I tell you what I think that punch is?
Yeah.
An ending. An ending. It needs an ending,
man.
Honor. Honor. It needs. It's got to have an ending because nothing else mattered. Nothing that happened before matters at all. And I get that there's a season 2 coming.
Mm-hmm.
I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm living in the present.
Mm-hmm.
I'm living in 2019 to 2024
Mm-hmm.
in a world where there is no season 2 and it doesn't end. And when it's a mystery podcast,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fundamentally, there's a mystery at the heart of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what was the point? Why did I do that?
Because then when season 2 comes out, you'll be like, let's go listen.
I'm not gonna go listen to season 2.
I will.
You will, and hopefully you tell me, and if there's no ending to that, I will fall on my knees and shake my hands at the sky, and I'll say, "Curse you, Jake Emanuel and Willie Block, writers of The Edge of Sleep."
Sounds like you're invested then.
I'm frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I am.
That's a kind of investment.
You're sick.
Yeah. Thanks.
I feel like that's kind of all I've got.
Yeah.
On the whole, Edge of Sleep is an amazingly put together podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Well acted, well produced, sounds good. And so in that way, like, if we're just comparing those parts that, you know, like, the voice and the sounds I'm hearing are pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So, like,
Yep.
if we're comparing that thing, which it has in common with all other podcasts, it's doing great.
Mm-hmm.
If we compare it to other audio dramas that have stories, it's not doing good. It's not. The story doesn't go anywhere.
I don't know if I would say it's not doing good. I don't think it's fantastic. I think it's interesting. I think it's good.
Yeah. We're going to disagree on that one.
That's okay.
It's okay.
I also think that's really influenced by how angry you get when there's no ending.
Yes, absolutely. Well, also, there's 1,000 ways that this could have ended that would have also been bad endings.
Mm-hmm.
You know? It just... Maybe if there was an amazing ending, I would have been like, okay, you know, it was worth it to hear about Dave's high school crush.
Yeah.
You know? It was like worth it to listen to the creepy serial killer man be there for no reason.
I mean, that is a thing that you have said before, which I guess you maybe contradicted yourself because you were talking about the journey earlier, but you've said before on the podcast that you don't care as much about the journey if you care about the destination.
I care about the destination.
Yeah.
And there was no destination, so I was like, maybe I didn't like the non-destination because I also didn't like the journey.
Yeah.
So if there was a
Interesting.
great destination, maybe if there was a masterful putting together of the for whatever the dudes in Papua New Guinea got the sleep magic figured out.
Yeah.
And if I was like, oh, we were living in wow,
The whale.
the whale,
Yeah.
the mythology, maybe
The
I would have been like,
desert.
okay, this recontextualizes everything. The parts I didn't like are lessened, but there's no ending, so I'm thinking about how I felt through the whole time.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. I think those are all my thoughts. That's my rant.
Uh-huh.
I sometimes feel like I am an old man on this podcast.
That's funny because I was about to say, you know, Sam, I think you're what's wrong with this generation.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Honor.
You're so welcome.
Thanks for calling me part of this generation.
Yeah.
It's a compliment. I don't
once-
get that a lot.
For once in your life, you're not being called an old man
Thank you.
because you're impatient and you can't handle when things don't have an end.
Oh my God, you are shitting me right now. Leave that out, you son of a. That's
No, that was so worth it. That's so funny.
5 years.
Yes, dude. Yes.
Hey, Honor.
Dude, I'm reading a book series right now. And by right now, I mean, I think it's 5 years between each book that's coming out. and each book is like 1,000 pages, and then you wait for however many billion years before the next book gets read.
Is
and
there an
you know
ending
what?
to any of
It's
these books?
awesome. It's going to be a 10-book series. It's a huge fantasy epic. The Stormlight Archives, if anyone's interested. There's actually maybe one that came out like this year that I need to read. Regardless. You know,
that may
little
be,
patience.
That may be beautiful. That may be an awesome book series.
Yeah, and it is. You would hate it, though.
I probably would. An Edge of Sleep for me is not an awesome podcast. An Edge of Sleep might be a 2 or 2.5 out of 5.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, 2.
Yeah.
I mean, at 2.5. I'll settle on a 2.5 because it is immaculately produced. Sounds great.
Yeah, I do
but
want
as a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thumbs down.
I will rate it. I even was gonna be like, the Markiplier fans might get mad at me because I think my rating is probably a 3.5 out of 5.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think I'm more harsh on it than other people are. In that, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's the greatest story. I think there's interesting things about the character that I wish were explored more. But I think it's a fun listen. I think it's interesting. I think especially, like I said earlier, if you are more in it for the horror of the thing and being freaked out, then there's more fun in it that way than if you don't like horror, like some people we know.
What are you talking about? Don't be silly.
What? But yeah, I think I'd say a 3.5. I think it's a solid podcast. It's not super long. Yeah, it's not finished yet, but I have faith that they're going to be making season 2. There's also the TV adaptation that came out recently. I actually haven't watched it yet, but I've heard that it is good.
And to be clear, I guess we should talk about that.
Yeah.
Very briefly. It is an adaptation.
Yes.
It is season 1.
Yes.
And it's slightly different from some of the
parts
I've read.
It is slightly different, yes.
They also released a novel, which is
I hadn't known about that until lately.
Different characters, different place.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what to do with that is. But importantly, the thing I was looking for, there is still no ending.
There is still no ending, no. Yeah, it's an adaptation of season 1. I don't know if all the characters are played by the same actors, but I know Dave is played by Markiplier Fishbach.
I think everybody else is different.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
kind of what I thought, but main character's the same. So,
perfect.
You know.
Honor, thank you for helping me go through this emotional, traumatic experience.
Uh-huh.
I feel rejuvenated.
I'm so glad.
I feel, like a weight has been lifted off me.
You feel maybe like you've had a good sleep?
I actually am feeling a little tired.
Awesome.
So I think I am going to go take a nap.
You're going to go back to sleep?
I'm going to go back to sleep.
Right where... Oh, yeah, because we're in your house.
Yes. This is where could you...
Yeah.
Would you mind?
Yeah.
Just leaving?
And
while Honor does that, thank you for listening, listeners. Be sure to send us an email to the podpodcastcastpod@gmail.com inbox. Tell us your thoughts on Edge of Sleep. Tell Sam to calm the freak down.
Mm-hmm.
Let us know what other podcasts you'd like us to take a listen to.
Yes.
Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Write a little review down there. We'll read it sometime.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a follow. You'll see the next time we post something or episode. Whatever we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Honor, thank you for podding with me.
Thank you for podding in your house.
Perfect. Listener, thank you for listening. Now, both of you need to leave. I'm going to bed.
Goodbye. Good night.